Hello everyone, and welcome to my beginner's guide for C# variables in Unity. If you do not already have Unity Hub installed, be sure to get that. There will be a link in the description, and when installing your preferred version, it should have the option to install Visual Studio, which is what we'll be using today. It is very helpful, especially considering it uses IntelliSense, which helps call out errors you have made. Today we will keep things short and sweet, just covering variables and how to print them out in the console at runtime. In the next episode, we'll cover some of the common functions in Unity. To get started, we will need two things: a game object to attach the script to so that it will run when we start the game, and a script to attach to the game object. So first, you're going to want to go over to the hierarchy and right-click and create a new object. It can be pretty much any one of these. Then you'll come down to the File Explorer window for your project, right-click again, and create a C# script. Now, first, I'll explain the variables, and then we'll write them out so there's not too much going on at once. Prepare your ears, pull out your notebook, and grab a coffee. First off, there is the integer, which is written as int. The integer variable type stores numbers that do not have a decimal point, nor will they ever. Then, there is the float, which is written the same. The float variable type stores numbers that will at some point have a decimal point, if not already. Next is the boolean, which is written as bool. The boolean variable type stores a true or false value. String, which is written the same. This variable type stores multiple characters, such as a name. Then we move on to the Unity specific variables, such as GameObject. The GameObject variable type stores any object that can be placed in the scene, like we did over in the hierarchy. And lastly, I won't go into detail about these today, but there's transform, vector2, vector3, the names of script service variables, rigid body, character controller, etc. Essentially, what you're doing is telling the script what kind of information you want to grab from the object you give it. Integers, you want numbers. Strings, you want characters. Rigid bodies, you want aspects of rigid bodies. Character controllers, you want aspects of character controllers. I'll give a better example of this at the end of the video. So let's write out some of these variables. We declare the variable type, int. We give it a name so that we can refer to it. We'll call it number1. And then we give it a value, which is what we want to know when we call its name. Hopefully that makes sense. With time, I promise it will. Alright, I'm going to quickly write out these variables. We have our integer, float, boolean, and string. Next, we're going to go down, delete the update function because we don't need that for this video. Expand our start function here, and let's print out the value of variable number 1. So we're going to type in debug.log and then refer to our variable. Now we save the script, Alt-Tab back into Unity, and run our game. Switch over to the console tab down at the bottom, or at least that's where I have mine, and you will see it prints out the number 1. We could even kick this up a notch and start combining the values of two variables. Now, in some instances, this won't work, but you'll learn that later on, or even I will cover that at some point probably. But since these are both numbers, a float and an integer, we can combine them. The thing to keep in mind is if it has a decimal place, we would not be able to later store that inside of an integer. You see, for the sake of cleanliness, we could even add another thing into the mix here with the debug.log, put in some parentheses and put a space in between them, and then when it prints out, there will be a gap between the two variables. Alright, now that essentially covers the basics of variables within C#. But if you'd like to see something that you might see in the real world or something that's a little more applicable, let's reformat these a little bit. One thing you'll notice is all of my variable names are camel cased. Now what that means is the first letter of the name is always going to be lowercase, and then every next word is capitalized. And then there's tomorrow. I can't type, but you get the idea. That's camel casing. You always want to do that for your variables. So we're going to rename number 1 to current ammo. So in this context, it would say we have 3 current bullets left in the magazine. Float could be your player's health points, and you'd probably have that set to 100. Now for the Boolean, I'm not going to be programming the functionality of this because that's a bit too intense for this, but we would say something like can shoot. So when they are in the middle of reloading, we would set this to false, meaning they couldn't shoot, and every time we wanted to shoot, we would check the status of this variable. One other thing that I wanted to show you real quick is how these variables can help you pull information from a game object. So one of the most common variable types that you will use is the game object variable. We'll just call it player. One other thing that I should note, though it's not too terribly important in the beginning, is these are all currently private variables. They only can be accessed by this script, or by this class more specifically. If you would like to have these variables accessed by another script or within the Unity editor itself, you would classify or declare them as public variables. As I said, these are already private by default, so you don't have to say private. But so now that this is a public variable, I can go down to Unity, save this, let it recompile the script. Now under the script, we see current ammo, and we can even interact with it from the editor. Now this does have its drawbacks. You see, we can interact with it from the editor. So if I set this to 10, the game will recognize this as 10 when we launch it, but my script says 3. It will not understand it as 3 when we run the game. In the script, technically it will be 10 here, but it is something that can cause confusion. So whenever I'm creating a public variable, I never set it within the script. Transform. That is an aspect of this game object. It is a variable that we can refer to and pull information from. So first, we understand that it's a game object, hence why we wrote game object player. So quickly, we're going to make this a public game object. Go back to Unity, and we're going to grab the sphere and plug it into that slot. There we go. We have set the variable of player as the sphere game object. So whenever we refer to player, we are referring to this sphere. But we want to get the transform. So we have to first find the object, and then we can access its properties. So we would do player.transform. And now we have access to position, rotation, and scale. So you'll notice, period, you have position, parent, all those other things, but position, parent, scale, and rotation. Now, I might have not explained that super well. This is kind of just an extra little tidbit at the end in case you were a little more curious. I will have a dedicated video going over how or what we want to interact with, how we want to interact with it, better practices to not have scripts fighting over things. It'll all come with time, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more motivation to really lock this information down. You will use it, I promise. Regardless, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this taught you something. Hopefully my metaphors were of service to you. They helped you understand variables. And if you have any recommendations for what I should cover next, be sure to leave that down in the comments section. And that is about it. Thank you for giving me your time. God bless and good night.
CC on the track, boy.
Cruise on the track.